Good evening. My name is Phil Schomber. I'm the adult programmer here at Hedberg. I want to thank everybody for coming, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Jill Crista. Dr. Crista is a naturopathic doctor, nationally recognized health educator, and author of Break the Mold, 5 Tools to Conquer Mold and Take Back Your Health. If you don't have a copy, you'll have an opportunity to purchase one and have Dr. Crista sign it. In the book, as you may know, Dr. Crista discusses the various health effects of mold and how often we don't even realize that we're being affected by it. And she's here tonight to share some of those facts with us. So without further ado, would you please welcome Dr. Jill Crista.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. All right, so Break the Mold. That's the book is all about trying to help you do as much DIY, do-it-yourself mold breaking that you can, because there are so few doctors that are trained in mold, and it can go undetected so much. And the tests for mold are terrible. So we're in that place of the question mark, and you can be sick from mold even if you were exposed years and years and years prior. It can still be affecting your health. So it's also not one of those that's intuitively tied to this exposure happened and then my illness happened. Hi, welcome. No, it's fine. No problem. So I in practice as a naturopathic doctor, most of the time when we clean up someone's diet and we find out the cause of their illness and we treat it, and we have patients that are very willing to take on the big diet changes, the exercise plan, the lifestyle changes, getting their sleep on board, that kind of thing, things get better. But I had this subset of patients that were just stuck. We threw everything at them and things just didn't move the way they're supposed to. So then I became really involved in Lyme disease treatment, because that usually was the thing that was behind those kinds of weird conditions that just kept persisting and persisting and persisting. And got trained. I did my physician training in Lyme, and so more of those stuck patients got better. It was great. But there was still this other group that just wouldn't move, even though everything that and these were 110% effort kind of people. So then, in one of the houses of one of my patients, oops, I think I have to point this a certain place. I'm not sure where I point the clicker. Oh. Little pause, tech pause. So, there was this little bubbly area in the basement of this patient, and that was the corner. We pulled back carpet, and that turned to this. We pulled more, which turned to this. And it turns out that it was black mold, and by treating it, we were a little late in the diagnosis, but by treating it and managing the mold, his health improved dramatically. So there was more energy, more joy. His hair actually turned darker from gray back to black. It was really cool. So then I learned a lot about mold, and I got pretty good at it to try to move those other stuck people. And then when you have mold and Lyme, that makes it things move a little slower, right, Bob? Just a little slower. But then I thought, well, I think I know a lot about this mold stuff, but I'm ready to put it to bed. And this little crack happened on my own kitchen ceiling. When there's the spot, and then it rained on me on my kitchen sink through these 2 light fixtures one day. And that turned into this, and that part of the ceiling, so I had to take the whole ceiling because the bathroom above was leaking, which turned to this. Because of course water goes this way, right? So it made it all the way to the basement. So that became, they had to take out the floor. So we had what we called an open concept kitchen. Nice and airy, Became that's looking from the basement up. All the basement walls had to be taken, all the basement flooring, which became that. It all can be remediated. So what I want to tell you is not only am I now trained as a doctor in how to handle it, but been there myself. And the inspiration for the book was when this happened, once we figured out it was mold, because we were starting to have these weird symptoms, weird ones, like not not respiratory. Mold doesn't necessarily have to be respiratory. You don't have to have respiratory symptoms for it to also be mold. So that's where we were at. We were at foggy mind, fatigue. Hi, welcome, come on in.
Sorry, I'm late.
No, you're not. Actually, we had 2 time postings, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so you guys, it's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So, and when it's happening to you, have you heard the term cook a frog? I talk about it in my book, How to Cook a Frog. Theoretically, if you boil hot water and you take a frog and put it in, it'll jump out because it feels the threat. But if you put the frog in cold water and you slowly turn up the heat, it'll stay in there and you can cook the frog. That's the theory. I have not tested it because I love frogs too much to do that to anything. But that's what was happening to us. This is a newer house to us, and as we started to close it up, it was little by little. We had a beautiful fall, and so, as we closed the house up, more and more brain fog, fatigue, neurological things, gut problems, going to the bathroom all the time, peeing all the time, that kind of stuff. So it was like ear ringing, but no respiratory symptoms. And then we found out it was mold. I got to get right on all the treatments because I was trained in it. And I thought, people need to know about this. There aren't enough doctors who know this stuff, so that's the impetus for the book. So what I want to do is just really whip through the 16 mold facts I think everybody should know. I tried to make things very lighthearted because this can be a serious and scary condition, and also just simple enough that it can lock in there someplace and it can come back a little faster. And then I want to leave lots of time for questions because that's where it's more fun, is to be able to answer your direct questions. So the first one is mold is a survivor, most definitely. I think of it as like the Navy SEAL of the bug world, the critter world. It knows how to lurk in a building undetected and just wait things out. So the little bullet points here is it can lurk inside the building without any smell. The toxins from mold can come through building materials. The stink of mold stays locked behind. So there has to be some kind of air access to that, what's locked behind the building material, and that's behind drywall, under flooring, it can be ceiling tiles, it can be moldy on one side, and you don't ever smell it because it's not interacting with the air. But the toxins move through and they're like a toxic gas. So it'll just be there, and it can survive on hidden moisture sources. What's the average humidity in Wisconsin in the summertime? 80, right? So mold will grow above 50% humidity. So if your indoor air humidity isn't managed with dehumidification, we have so much pre-digested materials that we build with now. That's perfect because now it has food and it has humidity. That's all the moisture it needs. So you fed and watered it. Is that scary or what? Just kind of, everybody's gonna run home and get their dehumidifier going, right? If you don't have one, okay. Mold will compete for territory by gassing out its competition. So once it finds a little sweet spot of extra moisture, that's like lakefront property. And it wants it all to itself, and it'll start competing with those toxins. So if you have a hospitable environment, other molds will try to come in, and then the mold starts acting more aggressively. Where if it wasn't a hospitable environment, it would have just lived there dormant, and that wouldn't be affecting your health. Mold is tenacious too. It'll hunker down and it'll wait until an opportunity to grow. So it has a way of sensing when it's under threat and when it's kind of coast is clear to grow. And that's also pretty creepy. So, true or false question. Mold is a problem for old buildings, not new buildings. What do you think? True? False? It's an old building problem?
It doesn't matter, I suppose.
Exactly. So not just an old building problem. Mold can grow on a water damaged or moist surface within 48 hours. So not all molds, but you can grow, you can harvest it basically, and it doesn't matter what the material is. Some materials are more resistant. So that's how here's the bathroom that was above the kitchen. This one had just a little, some kind of like little smell of something weird. After we had lived there for a while, we were the hangout house, so we had a lot of kids over, they would use the shower. So there could be, 8 or 9 showers in that bathroom in one day. And with sports and, all that kind of stuff. So I think we kind of saturated the situation. And then that became this, because all that subfloor had to be taken out, and there's that light that rained. And then that became that. So it can be remediated. Don't feel like you have to leave. But, so, correct, mold is not only an old building problem. That's your takeaway for today. So mold has bad gas. The toxins I was talking about can seep right through all of the respiratory passages. So typically spores, because of their size, they're bigger. So spores will come down and they'll get caught in some of our mucus of our lungs that's protectant, and it will get, they kind of, these fingers kind of wiggle the spores back out and you can cough them out. Spore fragments, which what happens when you break mold or when you disrupt it, it'll spit out these little fragments. Those guys are a little more like asbestos. They can get a lot farther down, and they can lock into the smaller areas of our lung tissue that gets past the fingers, the clearance area. But mold toxins are 50 times smaller than a spore, and they're a gas, so they just seep right into our blood system. So mold is, that's a big takeaway. I want you to think about it as a toxin problem, like a poison problem, not a allergy problem, not a spore problem. So your takeaway, oh, here, true or false? You'd know if you had a mold problem because it would smell. Oh, so you guys are good. Okay, which I think we covered all that. So, yeah, the other mold chemicals, the chemicals in mold that stink are VOCs, aldehydes, alcohols, and that can actually make you sensitive to all those things. So one of the cardinal symptoms for me is if somebody has never had a problem, they've been a healthy person, took a new job in a new building, or moved into a new house, or a new apartment, or got a cabin up north, like their dream cabin, and they spent the summer up there, and suddenly the person develops grass allergies, chemical sensitivities, can't burn candles anymore, has to start using natural cleaning products, maybe has some food sensitivities, because some foods mess up the gut and never did. Okay, what's going on in the new building? Because that has a high potential that it's mold. So, mycotoxins have no scent. That's the takeaway for that guy. Mold is a bully because everyone reacts to it differently. Your base health status before you get that water damaged building exposure, and your genetics. So there are certain genetics that are like the dreaded mold genes. Certain genetics make you more susceptible, meaning you can't clear those toxins out of your body as easily as someone else. You know, those people that are just strong like bull, same, like they have a big bowel movement same time of day, they sleep like a rock, you know, those kind of people, they're going to be less susceptible to having the effects of mold illness. But mold picks on the people who have more susceptibility. And it's uncanny to me. I mean, maybe 75% of our buildings are water damaged. The OSHA estimates that it's about 50% of our buildings in the United States have had water damage. But it always seems like the people with mold sensitivity find themselves in the houses with the water damage. I don't know what that is. So I don't know if mold finds them, travels with them, or how that works. Or if it calls them, like in their sleep, I'm not sure. But that's how that works. So it can be, the bully thing is that the person that's more susceptible starts to have symptoms earlier, and everybody else in the house or the building is fine. So a workspace or something, everyone else can be feeling fine, and that person can start to feel like a hypochondriac. So the next thing is mold will invade your body. The way to think about this is once you've been exposed to a water damaged building, the toxic gases of the molds competing with the bacteria and competing for lakefront property in that space, all those gases, when you breathe them in, turns on a survival mechanism in your own flora. And then they start to make toxins. So what we find is that, like, if we sampled normal people, if we took a sample of their nose mucus, everybody would have fungus. The fungus isn't the problem. It's the exposure to the gases that then triggers your fungus to feel under threat and start behaving badly. So there's a lot of doctors who have chased Marcons. It's this, and MRSA and different kinds of antibiotic resistant bacteria in the sinuses. What they really need to be looking at is what is the building exposure for that person, because if they're continuously being exposed to biofilm gases, they'll continuously make naughty critters in their sinuses and the gut. So water damage building exposure is the key. Mold causes toxic breath. So if your normal sinus fungus that used to coexist with your flora and everything was happy, and you got exposed to a water damaged building, and then that turned on everybody acting competitively and not like a community anymore. Now, every time you breathe in, you're breathing in mycotoxins and soaking them into your lungs. Every time you breathe out, you're sharing mycotoxins with the world. Isn't that nice? I've actually had a couple different cases. I had a case of a little baby with eczema. Mom was mold toxic, and every time she would nurse, baby would break out in a rash. And so we were saying, oh, it's probably food sensitivity, it's probably all these things, maybe it's connected to what she was ingesting. We started treating mom for mold, and granted, you can get mycotoxins through breast milk, so that very much could have been what she was ingesting. But I also noticed that when we covered baby, so let's just try an experiment, let's just cover baby, and then you nurse, and she wouldn't break out in as bad of a rash because she wasn't breathing out these mycotoxins. That's what I'm assuming. It'd be really fun to have a doctor conversation about that case. Because so many times you're like, I don't know what's going on. But, so the idea is, even if you left the building, once you've had that exposure, you're bringing the problem with you in your sinuses and your gut. It has to be treated. And the way we do that is that we knock down all the populations back into their normal population and to start acting like a community again. And that's in the sinuses and the gut. So mold won't go down without a fight. Dying mold becomes more toxic than living mold. When you start to kill it, it starts to, and there have been studies that show this, when we give amphotericin B to aspergillus, which is one of the molds that is normally existing in everyone's sinuses, but that turns into naughty aspergillus. That aspergillus will start pumping up more toxins than aspergillus that was just existing there in a naughty state. Isn't that crazy? So you have to prep the body, and I talk about that a lot in the book, peeling the orange. You have to prep the body so that when you start killing it, your body's ready to handle all that extra toxin. Mold turns you into a wimp, and what I mean by this is that it affects your immune system in multiple levels. It's directly toxic to the cells of the immune system, so your white blood cells, your innate immune cells, and it will also, specifically natural killer cells, that's one of them that I like to test for, natural killer cell total and natural killer cell function. The total might be normal, but usually the function drops when you've had mold exposure. So it's directly toxic to those immune cells, but then it also starts to rewire your genes to tell you not to make strong soldiers and to not recognize mold as the problem. It's really crazy. And it also can cause cancer. So more susceptible to infections and cancers. Mold causes cravings. So that's I gave the little case of the person that has the lake cottage and then spends the summer and then ends up having all these other things. They usually also will tell me that they've become a sweet tooth and maybe even crave alcohol or can't tolerate alcohol. It can go either direction because the mold toxins, we all know one, it's called brewer's yeast, right? Makes alcohol and we ingest it. And a lot of the symptoms that you get if you ingest too much alcohol, you get by being exposed to a water damaged building. So my joke is, breathe moldy air, get drunk. It's a cheap drunk, right? You don't even have to buy it. So specifically those sugar, because it loves carbohydrates. It loves things that are easy to digest. Mold can make you feel crazy, hazy, and lazy. Crazy is just that brain fog thing, and also that you, if you're what I call a mold canary in the coal mine, somebody that's going to react a little sooner than somebody who is genetically not susceptible, has pre-existing, healthy as a horse kind of person, the person that's reacting first is going to feel nuts because no one else is getting sick. And hazy, it affects your vision. Think about again if you've ever, I don't know that everyone in here drinks, but if you've ever ingested too much alcohol, how the test, one of the tests for that, if the cops need to stop you, is a vision test. That's because your vision actually stops coordinating the left and the right eye, and you don't perceive things as quickly. There's a delay. That can happen with mold toxicity too. So I've had a few times where people went into the eye doctor, got their glasses prescription, got them, got home, put them on, and they didn't work. Back to the eye doctor. These aren't my prescription. You must have done something different. Go back to the eye doctor, change their vision, just tweak it a little bit because it changed as they were more exposed to the environment. The prescription keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Person goes on vacation. Oh, my glasses are making me dizzy. They're too strong. Go back to the eye doctor. I think you messed up my prescription because I can't see I can't see my glasses through my glasses anymore. And it was just the amount of exposure to mold toxin in their home that changed the vision. Isn't that crazy? And then lazy. There's a high correlation of people with chronic fatigue syndrome that have mold toxicity. Mold causes allergies. So again, that immune depletion that we talked about, that will also make your immune system too pooped to know what to freak out about. So it will start freaking out about everything you're exposed to in a large amount. So right now that would be pollen. But then in the winter it will be dust. And then it will be your cat. And then it will be, it just, you start reacting to all the inputs that are coming into the body because the body doesn't know, oh, no, that's not an offender, that's just something we see a lot. And food allergies. So the food allergies is the same thing. So if you're not eating seasonally and changing your diet a lot, the thing that you eat every day, day after day, once you've been exposed to a water damaged building, the body starts to say, well, I think that protein is what's making me feel bad. And it'll start attacking that protein of the food. So I've had a lot of times people have, especially the Lyme disease mold combination people, were down to 4 foods that they could eat when they came to see me. So that's not going to maintain health. We need to get the mold treated so that you can get your diet back to normal. We already talked about mold makes you sensitive to chemicals. This is kind of it's cool but not cool. Mold makes you sensitive to electromagnetic fields because when you're having mold in an environment increases having EMFs in an environment, so Wi-Fi, cell phones, smart meters, those kind of things, forces mold or causes mold to feel threatened, so it starts to divide more and make more toxin. And then if you have mold sensitivity, you're more sensitive to EMFs because of how it's changing your inside the cell capacity for managing EMFs. EMFs are not the evil one. We make natural EMFs when we exercise. We are electromagnetic beings, but it's that we're getting now an overload of it. So you wouldn't do that with alcohol. We talked about mycotoxins being like alcohol. You can't do well if you're continuously ingesting alcohol. You can't do well if you're continuously ingesting EMFs either. So my treatment for that is get out in nature, because nature resets all of that. It's beautiful and it's so accessible for most people, at least in where we live, maybe not necessarily in the city. Mold sickness is hard to identify, super hard to identify, often misdiagnosed as other things. So what I did is I took all the things I learned in practice and I created a questionnaire. I have a questionnaire for Lyme disease, and now there's a really brilliant doctor, Dr. Richard Horowitz, who came up with a scientifically validated, scientifically validated Lyme quiz or questionnaire. And so this is meant to complement that his says on a scale of 0 to 100% it's Lyme disease. I modeled this questionnaire after his, saying 0 to 100% it's possibly mold sickness, so that you get an easier, it takes this whole picture, because mold affects you on your whole body, it takes the whole picture and tries to create order for me, the clinician, and maybe you, so that you could track treatment or who the people in your life that are sick from mold. So category 1 is things that are commonly seen with all kinds of other conditions. It can be, they're not necessarily specific to mold toxicity. Category 2 is getting a little more specific to mold and a little more severe. And then category 3 is your really severe, really targeted. And then the cool thing about this is that then you can, each one is scored, category 3 is scored a little heftier because it's a little more serious and it's a little more tied to mold. And you get a score. So again, if you want a copy of that, we were talking about that earlier, you can send an email to support@drcrista.com. My assistant, Leanne, will get a PDF printable copy so that if you do find that it's mold, you can fill it out every so often and see how you're doing with your treatment. It's pretty neat. For me as a clinician, it's really neat because quantifying wiggly symptoms is hard. So mold sickness is often misdiagnosed. There are lots of different diagnoses that range from neurological to GI. There's SIBO, it's this bacterial overgrowth of the gut. There's something called SIFO, which is fungal overgrowth of the gut. That can be tied to mold illness. Liver chemical toxicity problems, immune problems. And here, if you, rather than taking individual systems in the body, if we look at it holistically and look at your exposure, just by getting out of the mold, you could heal up all those things. So my big takeaway, if you guys had to, like if you were sleeping through any of this, this is the big one. Mold sickness is bigger than spore sickness. It's not just respiratory reaction to spores, because most of the time, those spores are trapped behind building material and they're not even getting into the air. So we can get into how to test a building, or I don't like to do a lot of that, but people then say, wait, so you're telling me that an air test isn't the best way to test for mold? And I'm saying, yes, exactly. Because most of the time, they're trapped. But the toxins are getting through, and that's what's really causing, like the biggest, 90% of the symptoms of mold sickness are these mycotoxins. And the last one is part of a scandalous cover-up. And what I mean by that is just that building materials are part of it. You know, they're just covering everything up. Things can look beautiful. You know, my house is a relatively new house. You wouldn't have walked in there, it was pretty clean. You wouldn't have said, ooh, this is a sick house. Because it looked perfectly fine on the surface. And there's also a lot of, you know, people with a lot of money, like insurance companies, that don't want to pay for people to get better from mold sickness. Because it's just, you know, it's, because the testing isn't really good, it's hard to say how it's affecting people, and it affects everyone differently. So it's still in that, it's really hard to prove that mold was the thing that did it, right? All right, so another takeaway, indoor mold, never, 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 never okay. I get the question, well, is this mold is in my shower, or this mold is on my windowsill, or you know, we peeled back this carpet, is that the bad mold? Every mold inside is bad. If you have something growing on the inside, your humidity is too high, and it's allowing the growth of all kinds of critters. And there could be things that you don't know behind. All right, that's it.